So, how much value should we give astrology in trying to find somebody we're compatible with?
How much value? So meaning, how serious should we take astrology when it comes to finding love?
Yeah.
So the default answer here is any two signs can make it work. It doesn't matter necessarily what your signs are. What astrology is going to dictate is how much work you're going to need. Okay, so in the context of finding love, if you found somebody and you had a great rapport with them and you had a ton in common and the relationship showed amazing potential and it happened that the signs were misaligned or mismatched, I would say don't worry about it. Go for love, right? And if you went one step further and said, Alan, not only are the signs misaligned, but I looked at the rest of the charts, and the charts both independently and in an overlay are misaligned, but everything else is lining up nicely, I'd still say go for it. And then what I would add is, and I would encourage you to understand how that individual's chart is going to manifest energetically in their life and how that energy might end up bringing challenges into your relationship, right? So for example, and I'll give you a simple one, each of the different signs operate in a different tense. And so for example, that's past, present, future. So the water signs exist oftentimes deeply in the past. The earth signs are present, leaning towards the past. The fire signs are present, leaning towards the future. And then the air signs are out in the future. So in the context of an air sign, for example, like an Aquarius, which is the most forward-looking sign of the zodiac, being in a relationship with, say, a Scorpio or a Pisces, which is a backward or a emotive sign carried into the past, if they got into a conflict, and let's say it's a male Aquarius and a female Pisces, for example, a common manifestation of that energy is they get into a fight, they're both engaged in it. The Pisces keeps saying, well, you did this, and then I experienced this, and then I felt this. And it's a feelings-based energy that hankers back to the past. And the Aquarius will listen to it. Aquarians are good listeners. They'll be present as best they can. But then their mind is saying, okay, I got it, but where do we go next? So the Piscean energy is going to spend time calling back. The Aquarian energy is going to spend most of their energy moving forward. In the event the conflict's not settled, days, weeks, months go by, something triggers it in the mind of that Pisces, and the Pisces wants to relive and communicate the conflict from weeks or months earlier. And the Aquarian says, why are we still talking about this? Didn't that happen last month? And so that's a common indication of an energetic misalignment, which is nothing more than requiring the signs of the respective couple to understand how each of their minds are working. And so insofar as the Aquarian is forward-looking but appreciates that they love and are involved with a Pisces, in the event conflict shows itself and then recycles itself over and over, the Aquarians have to be incredibly patient and communicate through to the point where the Pisces feels that the issue is settled and behind them. And in the event that the Pisces has a tendency to recycle it over and over and constantly call it into the past, the Pisces has to do the work that they can to either find a different venue to communicate the frustration that they experience in that conflict, right, to alleviate on the Aquarian, or to just recognize that the Aquarian is doing the best they can to go into the past, but it's not their strength, and to be a little bit easier with it, and to not bring in an excessive amount of emotion into the equation because the Aquarian doesn't receive the emotion well. So it's just a simple example of two signs that are trying very hard to make it work, but with a touch of understanding of how each of the respective minds are working, they're in a wonderful position to navigate potential conflict or energetic mismatch.
So would you prefer to put two signs that are compatible?
Absolutely.
Or two signs that are not compatible, but they have to go through adversity?
So I always give the default answer here. Life is hard enough. Life is really hard. And this is the part of the equation, especially in the modern era. You have endless choice. You're spread really thin. You're taking on a ton of projects. You're doing a million things at once. If your relationship requires a lot of work, if your relationship is conflict-oriented because you're just not aligned easily, if you gave me the choice between being involved with somebody who is energetically aligned or energetically misaligned, and you could say, Alan, one of them might be simple and easy and maybe even a little bit boring, and the other one might be intense and passionate, but quite a bit of work, I personally, as a Capricorn, with although fire in my chart, choose predictable and boring. I personally, if you had asked me 20 years ago, I probably would have gone for more the exciting relationship because I enjoy the indulgence of it. But if I'm looking for a long-term commitment, my energy is looking for as many compatibilities as possible. And the statistics bear this out. If you have practical compatibilities, like you share a religion, you share an education level, your incomes are relatively comparable, the more you have in common, statistically, the better your likelihood of being successful in marriage. Right? And if you carry that one step further, if you have similar spiritual beliefs and even similar soul ages and similar astrological energy, it's just a continuation of compatibilities that would likely lead to greater success in the relationship. It doesn't mean that a little bit of misalignment is a bad thing, and actually if you're able to overcome the misalignment, you can grow quite a bit closer. And keep in mind that if you're on a karmic path and you've karmically connected with somebody, a lot of that growth potential is because you have to do the work. And that is the work towards acceptance and recognizing that everybody's different, but going into a space where you're not trying to change them all the time.
Can you explain to us what a karmic path is?
Yeah, so when we speak of karma, the soul's incarnation, so think about instead of the human experience as being a 70 or 80 year experience, think about a karmic experience as one which doesn't have a defined beginning or end, but it simply has challenges that continue to show, and if they're unresolved in one lifetime, they spill over to the next. Right? Or even worse, if you've committed some type of act, some type of maybe a moment of cruelty or inconsideration and it wasn't resolved, now you have a karmic debt and that debt has to be repaid. So let's say, for example, you ran out on your wife, right? Maybe she had gotten accidentally pregnant, or maybe there were multiple kids and the home was a little repressive and maybe it was too challenging, and you got to the point where you were a young male, and this was years ago, and you're like, I can't handle the chaos, the crying, whatever it is, the responsibility, the burden, and you just left, right? You heard about these absentee fathers, they would abandon their family, and they would cause a great deal of pain and discomfort on the family that they left behind that maybe was financially or emotionally vulnerable. And if that male figure didn't make amends, reconnect, and try to resolve the energetic effects of their abandonment, the next incarnation may be specifically with the intent of them being relatively stuck in their relationship. And it's quite possible that they choose a manifestation that prevents them from getting away. So for example, they may come back with some type of illness, and they may be terribly dependent on a provider, a nurturer, to look after them, even if they're not connected to that nurturer, but now for the lifetime they're stuck in that environment. Or perhaps there are financial considerations that prevent them from escaping. Or maybe they come into such a strong traditional family unit that if they try to get out, like I had a friend who got involved with a married man and he tried to leave his wife only to have the man's father, Italian traditional family, said, you can't leave, and call him back into that relationship, his bad relationship with his wife. So there can be family or societal influences that prevent somebody from escaping if they're very strong. So all of that is simply saying that if there's a karmic energy, which is something that is a debt that needs to be repaid, it's very likely that you may even be involved in a relationship that can be endlessly challenging, a constant struggle, where you're always projecting out into the other person how you want them to change. And that person is projecting onto you how they need you to change. And it's a dysfunctional dynamic when you're involved with somebody who is constantly telling you you're flawed, you need to change, and you're stuck. You can't get out of it. Right? And if you end up in that kind of dynamic, it can be a wonderfully growth-based relationship, because at some point you may move to a state of acceptance, which is acceptance for self and acceptance for the flaws of others, and move into even beyond that state of conflict. Once acceptance comes to pass, you may develop the appreciation or even the adoration of the person for who they are, even if ultimately there's a miscompatibility or a misalignment. But that's the grand manifestation or the evolution and ultimately the repaying of a deep karmic debt. Right? And so how does that manifest astrologically? It's two mismatched or misaligned signs that end up bringing very different modes of energetic interpretation into a relationship. and ultimately leaving each other somewhat ignorant and projecting into the relationship how they would resolve the issue, but it doesn't connect with the person that they're involved with. And so if you ask me, would I rather be in an easy or a tough relationship, provided obviously I'm not repaying some type of karmic debt, I take the easy route. It's not always the case. Different energies, different signs, different relationships, they approach it differently. Some of this is beyond our control. There's a huge element of individual choice in this incarnation. And if we have a sense and awareness of self, we can often see it for what it is.